Hello there and welcome to episode 3 of the Not So Casual Gamer podcast. We're really settling into it now. We're finding our groove.
Yes.
Oh yes, absolutely. I am your host Sam Christensen, and joining me as always is Lewis Cunningham. Lewis, how do you fare on this fine day?
Hello. Well, it's actually not a fine day. It's a grey day, which is nice compared to last week, 2 weeks ago, because the sun was blazing at me and it was quite uncomfortable. I was sweating.
Yeah, it was quite funny to watch you on my small window here on my laptop, and you were pretty much squinting for an hour straight. So I think that
I'm sure that was delightful to see. However, physically, I might be slightly rough today, but that will not hinder this podcast.
Oh,
so
no.
if my voice sounds slightly rough or whatever to anyone, I apologise, but we'll be fine.
It's the COVID. It's the COVID, isn't it? You've got it. That's it.
It absolutely is not.
It's not.
But that's also fine. So,
well, that is fun. I don't notice anything, to be honest. I don't really notice any.
Well, then
any
forget
difference.
I said anything.
Forget you said no. You've covered your arse a wee bit there.
That's what I've done.
I just forgot to start the timer there. I'm going to do that right now because it gives us an idea. But that's been about a minute, so that's fine. Okay, before we even start talking about today's topic, just a little... I've actually not spoken to you much over the past 2 weeks, just a couple of messages here and there. We've been busy, weirdly busy for how we're still in a lockdown just now. But
a pandemic.
A pandemic, indeed. So really, I know how personally things are going on. That's fine. We don't need to air those things on a podcast. But in terms of what you are playing, what's been on the docket? What's on the cross media bar, as it were?
Well, cross media bar. Fairly similar to last time, just more. So kind of just working through a sort of backlog of. It's actually not even really a backlog. It's more of just diving into small/indie games that I wouldn't have otherwise, and actually really enjoying it. It's not something I've done like this for quite a while, and just with this continued downtime of not having your big AAA games or whatever, it's been great. I finished off Maquette, which I liked more than I thought I would in the end. It's kind of tacky story wise, but it's got enough interesting stuff in it. Good soundtrack. That's kind of what I was playing it for, really, to get teach the next song. And then obviously the Play at Home campaign from Sony. A few things off of that which are interesting. Rhythm games, actually. Thumper and Rez, which I had never played. Rez Infinite. They're both really cool, really interesting. Made for VR, really.
Yeah.
But I've still enjoyed playing them because I used to quite like things, like Race the Sun and stuff like that.
No, those remained on the console for quite a while to sort of jump back into. It's a sort of perfect game.
Yeah,
in that kind of sense, for sure. Well, if anyone is listening and has not heard about Sony's Play at Home initiative, and you have a PlayStation, there are something, what was it, like 9 games or something up just now? I can't remember the exact amount.
Before Horizon.
Before Horizon, so that there's going to be there's a lot of games to download for free. You don't need a PlayStation Plus membership. It is free games sitting there. I think the only ones I've really spent any time with on the list, I can remember off the top of my head, are obviously Ratchet and Clank from 2016 and Astrobot. That's the one. Astrobot Rescue Mission on VR. Speaking of VR, I just finally ordered the camera adapter
of course.
for the PS5, because I've not been able to play any VR since I got my PS5 and
forgot about that,
and sort of got rid of the PS4. So I'm quite looking forward to Moss. Moss was one that was kind of always wanting to play before I got the PS5, and just never really caught it on a sale or anything like that. So that's definitely the first one. When that comes through, I'm going to set it all back up. But it's just such a pain to set up. There's like part of me that just can't even be bothered. And it used to be a little bit easier with the PS4 because you could like put the the processor box on top of the PS4 and kind of hide the cables a little bit, but PlayStation 5's curvy and bodacious design doesn't lend itself to quite as neat. So I think it's going to be a bit more of a learn how to set it up quickly and pack it away when you're done with it, for the night, and kind of have the day of doing it. That's my plan.
Yeah, and I would imagine that when PSVR 2 comes out, it'll alleviate that somewhat.
Well,
Maybe it won't,
I think it is from what I've heard. I think from the sort of reports, the controllers have been announced, and I believe that the sort of rings around the controller act as effectively what the camera was doing before. So I believe that you don't need
sensors.
the camera, and it's only one cable into the front of the PlayStation 5. So it's still a wired headset, but it's just effectively one headset, a cable, and two controllers, and that'll be it. So I want to see what it's like. I'd like to get hands on with that, before I would sort of commit to the price of that. But I'm a firm believer in VR and do enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just
I
the hassle around it has been should be alleviated with the next unit. Here's hoping.
Yeah, I do quite like the idea of getting into it eventually. It will be when the second one is out now, if it's going to happen. Because I do like it. When we went to the demo event, it was
great,
fun. I don't know what it is. It never just felt quite enough for me to take that jump in. Yeah,
there's only a few experiences on there that I would like actively sort of go back to. Anything that sort of deals with fairly realistic or sort of movement, maybe not movement heavy because it's VR, it's all movement, but it's
but I know what you mean though, because you mean like when the character in game needs to move in a traditional sense. That was actually my main turn off. I just couldn't play those games, and I think because that would cut out quite a lot of games
for
play
sure
on it.
But then your games like Beat Saber or speaking of Astrobot deals with movement in a very unique way that I found very comfortable in comparison. And just sort of more of the sort of slightly static, maybe arcadey kind of ideas. I think it really suits well. But I'd be interested to see if there's sort of ways to sort of work around that. But we've spoke about VR probably longer than we would have originally planned here. So what I've been playing, I've been in a very odd sort of downtime in terms of games. Weirdly enough, this is so not video game related, but I just took out a subscription to Marvel Unlimited to read some comic books. So I've been quite enjoying that. So that's kind of where a lot of my downtime's been. Oh my goodness. See comic books, man, like they're great, but there's just so much stuff, and like it's so dense. Maybe not dense. It's so deep and interconnecting and interweaving, and like, if you want to understand what this bubble's about, you need to read She-Hulk issue 4 from 5 years ago. And I'm like, no. And I've got access to those things, and the app's really good for that, and suggesting that the sort of next story to move on to after the one that you've read, because it's not always just the following edition. Anyway, that's kind of where my time has been in sort of free time with that there. But obviously Warzone's kind of remained the game really just now. I'm still playing Crash, still playing Mario 3D World, but not quite as much. Crash is definitely, much like we spoke about 2 weeks ago, it's definitely in small doses, because I find myself getting quite frustrated by it.
Yeah, can imagine.
Which is partially disappointing, because I was feeling quite confident going into it, but I think it's maybe it's just, again, what we spoke about last time, the sort of unfamiliarity, but it just feels harder than the original ones. But we'll chalk up to an unfamiliarity, whatever the word is. And
wow, yes,
great job as a trying to talk on a podcast
as a public speaker.
But Warzone, I don't know how much you've been sort of following it. I don't think you've played it since the update. There was a 50 gigabyte update last week.
The update came on just last night for me actually.
Yeah.
So I have it installed. I'm sure I'll jump in back in at some point, but I definitely have fallen away.
Well, it's the 50 gigabyte update was. There's been a little bit of controversy. I think people don't quite understand necessarily what the update was going for. Effectively, it really just. I'm using very heavy air quotes here, but balanced two of the overpowered guns in the game, and it just didn't. But it was 50 gigabytes, and they're like, it was 50 gigabytes for that? What are you talking about, man? And what it actually was it was an optimization patch. It was actually making your overall file for Warzone between 10 to 30 gigabytes smaller. If you had all of Modern Warfare installed with the multiplayer and the campaign or something, you were saving 30 gig. I think if you just have the app that we have, the Warzone app, on the PlayStation 5, just downloaded the free to play one, I think it saved about 10 gigs, so it went from about 95 to 85 gigabytes.
It's funny. What a world we live in today, where a 50 gigabyte patch actually is designed to cut the space.
Yeah.
It's actually quite. I mean, try explaining that to your average gamer like 25 years ago.
Well, try explaining that to your average gamer right now, because they can't seem to understand that it was an optimization. But anyway, but that's the thing. But if anyone is listening to our tiny little podcast that has any sway or influence, please just get rid of those guns, because the game is near unplayable at this point in time. But there's nothing else to do just now, so I'm still playing
it from the man himself,
and I'm getting frustrated every time I play. But I'll still be on tonight, guys. You know, that's the kind of thing. That's where we're at. So that's
where we're at.
That's where we're at. Unfortunately, there is nothing else to do. But I'm looking forward to seeing some changes. I think new maps coming soon, and there's been some leaks and rumors. So
as in, like, main overall new not Verdansk map.
Well, that's the thing. There was a leak. Now, how much do you believe?
That's what I'm waiting for.
Of course, it came. There was a leak out on the 3rd. Well, the day before April Fool's Day, and that's the bit that causes some question marks. But effectively, there was a leaked trailer, an unfinished trailer. So it had some effects missing, and it looked quite janky. But it was effectively saying how because Black Ops Cold War is set in the Cold War, it's kind of going to run Verdansk back in time to like an 80s version of Verdansk. And then replace a lot of the points of interest on the map with, more Black Ops style things. So, for example, like one of the screenshots was, instead of the dam up the top of the map, it was like an aqueduct, and it was more of like a sort of rolling hills, no snow, no ice. I think the water was running, if I remember correctly. More like a waterfall. The stadium is more like this big sort of amphitheater thing from what the screenshots look like. There's not big sort of massive jumbo jets at the airport, so I think it's more like kind of private planes and small kind of and that would make the likes of Boneyard, the area in the map that's all destroyed planes, maybe into something else. And I don't know. It's a question mark. And then there's the other rumor that it's just going to be based off of maps that are currently in Cold War, that are in the sort of one of the game modes, and they're going to stitch them together and make it a big new, brand new map. So there's two very, conflicting rumors going about, but both seem to have their legs. But I think that that's going to just be what is it, like 18 days, 17 days time or something, when season 2 finishes and season 3 starts. So that's right. We're not far off of a change, and I'm interested to see what happens. I'm still involved. As much as I'm complaining about it being slightly imbalanced just now, I'm still enjoying it enough that I'm looking forward to that moment in time. So anywho, that is the games we are playing. Cool. I'm looking forward to the day where we're playing an ever rotating slew of big games and
real games,
none of this indie stuff over here. No. So anyway, let's jump into our topic for today. If you've seen the title of today's episode, we're going to be talking about remakes and remasters. Just remade games, effectively. This kind of spawned this topic really. It was on our list for when we were planning the podcast back at back in the early days, but we were planning last episode 2 all about our timeless classic games, and the conversation started to go towards remakes and remasters being the definitive way that allowing these games to live on in timeless classics status. And we decided to split it into a second a part 2, as it were, so you could treat this as a part 2
yes.
to the last episode. So yeah, we've broken things down into, much like normal just now, we're breaking things down into certain categories, and we're just going to be chatting away and see how that sort of pulls us into the next category after that. So I think we're just going to start off talking, let's start off positive. We've got some remakes and remasters that really, hit the mark, and then, we'll maybe move on to some that slightly miss the mark later on. So let's start positive. We don't want to start negative on this, even though I've just been talking rubbish about a game that I still play every single night. So, remakes and remasters. Lewis, I'll hand it over to you. What first jumped to mind when we were talking about remakes and remasters?
Well, obviously, quite a big point of discussion about the whole thing about remakes and remasters is, comparing what they bring to the table versus the charm of the original. And there's quite a lot of varied examples of ones that kind of change it up quite a lot, or in a lot of people's opinion, change it for the better. Sometimes not.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting to look at some examples where you would think, well, do we need a remake, or is just a remaster fine? That kind of thing.
Well, because categorically for the term remake and remaster tends to get put together quite a lot, but they are two very different things. If you
the lines have been blurred though.
They have been blurred.
There's been that many examples in recent years, and especially now, it's just an explosion of it, and it can be almost like a patch these days for like the PS5 version.
Yeah, for sure. So I think you're right. I think that the sort of terms have started to get a little bit, muddled and mixed up. But the way I kind of see it would just, a remaster is, your equivalent of maybe a texture, a high res texture. You're thinking back to like PS2 games that were remastered on PS3. It was always, HD collection or something like that. So it wasn't significantly. It was the same game at its core, but it had a nice coat of paint on it, or a better frame rate, or just a bit more stable. And you see that a lot with your games on PS4 and now PS5 especially. It's the same games, but they're just running at a more stable rate. But
which is the going thing just now.
Seems like it's definitely easier compared to like remaking a game from the ground up. So it's
being in such a now seemingly incremental, iterative console cycle where the jump from 4 to 5 to most maybe doesn't seem that big. So it's kind of now industry standard to give games that kind of treatment, and almost like it's become so prevalent. I mean, I remember when remasters would come out, it was a special kind of thing back in the day, and it was kind of quite a PlayStation centric thing in that kind of mid PS3 timeline, because for example you had I think there was the Prince of Persia trilogy and
Jak and Daxter. There was Sly Cooper. Metal Gear Solid had one on there for I think it was 2, 3, and Peace Walker, I believe.
Peace Walker,
were put onto HD collections.
Although I think that did come out on Xbox 360.
But they had that sort of uniform art style. It was it seemed to be a very sort of conscious effort to sort of link all of those things in one sort of branding. This is the HD collection of this game. You know what to expect when you see it. It's the same games. It's not your we took the source code from this game and completely rebuilt it in a new engine, or modernized it or anything.
And I think it's where it starts to get quite interesting because later on in the episode, I think when we were maybe talking about ones that maybe missed the mark or are a bit strange, for me, it's more that area of kind of remastery or potentially lazy examples that fall under that category.
Yeah, I've got some.
In terms of remakes, I mean, I want to say they were quite a new thing at the turn of the century. I can't really think of. I mean, there was maybe, you would have ports before then, and things that maybe seemed like a remake, but they weren't really thought of as that.
Yeah,
pre kind of.
You're thinking
because you had like the for example, Metal Gear Solid 1 was remade on GameCube.
I have that on my notes here. I've never played it, but I know that is deemed, in the way that you're talking about it, is it a remake or
well, almost totally different thing. Almost it seemed at the time, and that to me that almost felt like ground zero for this new way of thinking of.
Yep.
Well, it's like almost like a band going and re-recording their song with better equipment and
changing it up. I have to say, just before we move on, I do like when, because we're not comparing notes beforehand. We want this to be conversational. We want this to go off on tangents if it needs to, or it suits. But I do like it when our notes do kind of merge and together as one, and it's I like being on the same page. I think that's what I was trying to say.
Yes. Well, we don't want to feel like we're shackled to the constraints of structure and roboticism.
Oh, listen to these sentences come out in your mouth. Oh, aye.
You know me.
Yes, indeed. So, I mean, I've got a couple of. I mean, we're effectively we've not really spoken about the sort of other part of this section that remakes and remasters are slightly defined as much as we can. We'll define it a wee bit more throughout this, but. We want to speak about that versus the charm of the original games. You brought that up earlier. So,
yes,
because there is something to be said of, we've got examples that hit the mark, that they are the definitive way to play it, and we've got examples that miss the mark. So talking about what the charm of the original games bring to the table, and that's kind of where we tied in with our Timeless Classic episode from last week, was because there is that maybe that nostalgia factor that is going to play into some of this discussion, where the charm of that original game comes from the from its maybe its campiness or its visual style that can get overhauled and just kind of get ruined. So
glitches mayhaps.
But I think I know where that conversation may be going, but let's go. So yeah, what were the games that kind of came to mind that that have been remade for you, that maybe are now the definitive ways to play it? You would never find yourself go. They capture the charm, the essence, the feeling of the original games to the point where you would never really feel the need to ever go back to those old games.
Well, that was kind of an interesting way of putting it to me, because the first example I was going to give is the absolute number one recent example of a remake that jumps off the top of my head, which is kind of almost nothing like the original. And I think maybe a few people have already guessed that I'm talking about Resident Evil 2 and 3, but I didn't even play 3. It was kind of too short and really linear and kind of disappointing, apparently. I might play it one day, but the important one is 2. Big and meaty kind of remake. So obviously the original PS1 Resident Evil games were very much PS1 in style, both visually and I believe they were tank control based.
As far as I remember.
I never actually played them myself. We're just a bit too young. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you need to remember that we're maybe just missing the mark on some of that before you're all like, you didn't play the original before you played the remake. Oh, what you doing?
There's a certain games journalist that we listen to that is sort of against that idea.
Yeah.
He was kind of quite vocal about being, you're not authentic if you haven't played the prequel or the fucking
the original.
Yeah, but forget that. But so to me, that was really exciting because, you know, I'm a big horror fan, and I had actually played the... Now, it was so this is where it's interesting, because they did a Resident Evil 1 remake, kind of. I don't really know.
Yeah,
it was kind of half and half,
because it still had the fixed camera, didn't it?
It was still in the original style.
Yep.
Of the PS1 style, but you know, it had kind of updated visuals. Well, it did, but not in a. It didn't. It wasn't like a totally modern, high fidelity, realistic updating. It was quite a simple, straightforward kind of. Here's a way to play this PS1 game in a more palatable manner in 2015. So I had played that and enjoyed it, and I played Resident Evil 7, which was the new, like, totally different modern first person one. So I'd only ever played the 1 and the 7. So to me, it was really exciting to get stuck into 2, because it's like, wow, this is something quite different. It's almost bridging the gap between 7 and the original style. Or, well, I suppose it was quite similar to maybe what the precedent that 4 set, Resident Evil 4.
Yeah.
And yeah, it looked incredible. It was ultra smooth. And I think for many that is a perfect example of, like, this is the one we're going to remember now for years. It was exceptional.
Well, there was obviously that slight hesitance of, they're taking what we love and changing it. But I mean, me on the outside of that genre of kind of horror games, having never played either of them, I could see it as being right. They hit the mark on that one, and that was kind of where it was a little bit disappointing to see how they kind of missed the mark. Just based on top level opinions that I've seen online and on various websites and comment sections and they sort of missed the mark with 3. It seemed like that, maybe was it
rushed it.
Was it 2 teams? They kind of didn't know what they had with 2, and
to me it seemed like they just rushed
it on 3 already, or I don't know.
Well, it came out so quickly after 2, and it was like, oh, right, okay. So it did almost seem like they rushed it to just capitalize. They thought, they'll buy anything now. Give them a short wee. But anyway, it's fine.
So for Resident Evil 4, they need to take
if they're doing that, they need to
take a long time for that.
Hit that out of the park. But okay, so the opposite side of this point then, which I find quite interesting to think about, is there will be a clutch of more old school gamers, and old school in the sense of PS1 is their old school now. Where I think you do kind of see in some discussions that there was something really quite unsettling and scary about the original PS1 games because of their kind of lo-fi nature. And I think you will hear some people still say, if you go back and play it now, it has this unsettling vibe just because of the way it is, and that's always held up the way it was intended to. Well, and I find quite
also
interesting.
if you can, if you take away that level of control over the character, surely that makes it a little bit scarier, because you're not fully in control. Whereas with your modern game, it's very responsive. It's running at maybe even 60 FPS. I don't know if it's had a patch or.
I think it probably does now. Don't quote me on that. Who
knows? But that there can be some. That's that charm of the original game that I'm sure there are people out there that said it lost with that. But it seems to me that the sort of overwhelming majority of gamers would agree with you. They would align with you more.
I just thought that was quite an interesting example to look at both sides of that and see how actually they're both valid.
Well, I think it's a great example to start with. I think the one that when we were talking about this in the charm of the original games, and we've brought it up every episode now. We'll have to have traditional games that are brought up every single time, so we're talking about them always. No, but the one that came to mind first of all for me was Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 plus 2 that came out last year. That actually, side note, there is a PS5 upgrade. I have it. It's fine. Yeah, that's cool. But that's not the upgrade that we're talking about. It will just be the, obviously looking at PS1, Pro Skater 1 and 2, versus Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 plus 2, on the PS4. This is one of
Yes.
those ones where, I've got the experience of both. Maybe more so 2. That was the one I played a lot when I was very young.
I mean, we both do.
We both do.
To quite an extent,
we have the experience of both. We can say that we've played the original and the new one.
We are old enough to have appreciated those
exactly.
PS1 games, so
Exactly. So I feel like we're qualified to talk about this, but I feel like this is one where you could actually put this into you could almost put this into games to significantly modernize, purely if you're like a sort of diehard Tony Hawk fan, by the fact that they put in mechanics from 3, 4, and Underground, not the walking mechanics, but the wall plant mechanics. So wall plant mechanics, the trick alteration mechanics, like while you're mid grind or mid manual, the flat ground tricks from 4, the revert from 3. You forget that it was only Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 that introduced reverts, and it was only Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 that introduced manuals. So if they it's one of those. Now we've called this category that we'll talk about later, and we kind of talked about a little bit there with Resident Evil 2 remake, the significantly modernized. I maybe not the word significant, but in the Tony Hawk community, I think that was a big significant change. It really opened up a lot of these levels, and maybe to some it showed some flaws in some of these classic levels that they love, that with these new mechanics that were obviously based on levels that were designed to use them. I'm not saying that's my held opinion, but there's that versus the charm of the original games, but there's now this that slight significant modernization. Slight significant, that's an absolute contradictory statement there, but
podcasting,
it's all coming off the top of the dome. But it would now, for more than just one reason, it would be very hard to go back to Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 on the PS1. It would just be really, really difficult, because you'd be wanting to do your everything's just down to reverts. You'd play the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 levels and you can't manual, you know what I mean?
Do you know what I think? I feel like this is actually quite a similar example to Resident Evil 2, because you can almost separate them. Again, there will be those who still really enjoy going back. Now, obviously, it's kind of physically tough these days to navigate a way to go and play the actual old PS1 games. I mean, probably most people that are going to do that are going to download
emulators
and stuff, so you can do it that way, which is fine.
And you can, I can put my discs into my PS3, so I've still got the discs there.
There are ways.
And
but they definitely feel slow and clunky and weird and just really PS1-y. But again, there's still going to be something sort of maybe funny or enjoyable to go back to about that. But yes, I think the recent remake really hit the mark in terms of, they implemented things from future games, the gameplay stuff. It was just really responsive. It just worked perfectly.
That's another statement we've made every episode. It just works. Yes, so that's
Todd Howard.
We're gonna have enough catchphrases eventually to make a whole run of merch. There you go. That's what we're really. It's a premeditated thing. I said it was all off the dome, but it's not. It's all scripted.
Yes, we're reading off a script. Every little sort of all of this, the noises make awkward noise.
Put on English accent.
Accent, yeah.
Anyway, terrible English accent. But so that's one where I feel like it really it kept the charm of the original games to the point where I think because it, the games that came up in our top 10 list, it was Pro Skater 4, it was Underground, it was slightly later games that had kind of nailed the movement of Tony Hawk, the ones that we most fondly remember. So there's part
nostalgia as well,
Nostalgia as well, of course.
Because for many of those original games, 1 and 2 will be like their favourite games of all time.
For sure. But there's a part of me that's the way I remember Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. Do you know what I mean? Because I've played the other ones so much that there's part of me that like remembers the levels, remembers the soundtrack, remembers the
Absolutely.
the sounds and the the sights and of it all, and the smells of it all. No, but
I mean,
who knows that's this remake was the way I remembered those games. Is that the best way to put that? That's probably
thinking about playing in 2020 terms. 2020 terms.
2020 terms. Yeah, it's definitely that's the way, if I was thinking of the remake and I'm really excited for this is how I remember more predominantly Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2.
They nailed it.
They nailed it. They absolutely did. So that's why for me it absolutely, takes the charm of the original game and preserves it perfectly for me.
Perfectly, yeah. And honestly, that this is, if there's never another Tony Hawk game made, this would do really well to last.
Yes,
maybe even decades.
Yes.
Because it's so smooth to play.
Yep.
I can't really see how, if you're going back to want to play that classic Tony Hawk in years to come, it's just it's there. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't fault it.
It is.
And it'll be interesting later on in one of our next sections to talk about a very relevant other example. I don't want to spoil it just now because I'm actually really looking forward to tearing it to shreds.
I've got it. It's literally the top one in my section that we'll talk about. I'm very much looking forward to that. The other one that came to mind for me was definitely more remake than remaster, was the Crash Bandicoot, and I'll put in the Spyro Reignited trilogy as well. So the Insane trilogy and the Reignited trilogy from Crash and Spyro. I mean, they just in conversation just seem to get bunched together there. But those were ones that, again, that's the way I would have remembered those games growing up. And just to, it's more than that fresh like a paint. It is. It also unifies those games. There was such a, in the same way as Tony Hawk, there was such a sort of innovation from game to game in both of those franchises, that when you maybe finished, you went back and played Crash 3 Warped, and you had like double jump and you had sliding and you all this and that, and then to go back to one would have been very difficult. But the fact that they've kind of preserved the sort of movement from the later games and brought it into the first ones, and there's a worry there that these levels were designed on these movement sets, but I feel like they nailed it on both of those games as well, and definitely those are charming games through and through, and still are, to be honest, when you go back. But they're
so that was going to be my question. Would you say that these are maybe then moving into more the area of examples that usurp the originals completely, and you kind of can, it sounds harsh, but like dispense of the idea of going back to the originals, because why would you?
That's this is purely just me talking here, and one a guy who grew up on those games, so it's not, I do have a very fond nostalgia for those games, but you're not, I don't know, I'm not gonna run and grab my PS1 discs. I'm gonna launch the these trilogies before.
Well, we can only sort of speculate on what the consensus might be on this. There's always going to be certain people that will be like, no, of course I'm going to go back to these originals and enjoy them forever. But I think there probably will be good examples where it just doesn't seem like almost logical. So there's examples that I've got further down here where, to me, off the top of my head, the ultimate one for me, where it's like, well, there's basically no point in going back to the previous two versions of this game, and one of my favourites ever, Shadow of the Colossus.
Yeah.
For example, I just don't know why anyone would choose, if they've not played it, to go and play the originals now. Do you know what I mean?
And is the other one potentially Bioshock? Because that was one that was in my mind for that as well. Again, we've spoken about Bioshock so much, but why wouldn't you just go to the PS4?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously they were more classic examples of remasters, rather than Shadow of the Colossus was a remake.
Okay, fair. That's a different.
Well, the point there was that Shadow of the Colossus didn't change it up in any massive way in terms of the controls were the same.
Yep.
And the visual style was the same, but it was just done in a modern engine, and the fidelity and control you had over it was just refined to such a degree that to me that basically just dispensed with the previous two versions. Whereas, you could make more of an argument of going back, and if you really had to, for whatever reason, you could get away with playing the original versions of BioShock because the jump isn't quite as much.
That's fair.
But they are, the PS4 remasters are going to be the definitive ways to play them, just because they're nicer, you know.
Yeah, it's that lick of paint that's been put on it is really all that it needs, and there's no real point. You're not missing out on anything original by jumping to the PS4 version, and then you're kind of just putting yourself at a slight disadvantage when you play the PS3 version. But nothing like controversial. It's the same way your Uncharted trilogy and things like that. Last of Us remastered on PS4. You may as well just play those versions. They're just a boosted version of that original game. I don't know if there was I've got a couple of other examples that we can kind of go into with the sort of charm of the original games. But I was thinking we can try and sort of talk, if you've got any other examples of games that sort of significantly modernize, before we start maybe getting slightly more negative about things. But
yes, because that will be like a sort of a section in itself. But see, this is where it starts to get quite nuanced and complicated about how different people feel about different examples of remasters, because it can even come down to things where hardcore fans of a certain game will maybe complain about, maybe the balancing of systems has been thrown off. They've not implemented the stats right in this version, or for whatever. So, for example, to me, this was one that I thought of. I don't know for sure if this is one that hardcore fans of the original complain about in this way, but it's maybe one that had the potential for this, and I'm sure there's examples out there. Demon's Souls.
Okay.
The recent PS5 Demon's Souls. I think it's quite unanimous that it's great, and I think it does, by the sounds of it, because we are not very good at these games, so we don't play them.
We'll maybe bring in a Souls correspondent at some point.
Much to our chagrin.
Yes, no, definitely.
And we'll maybe talk about those games in some way in another episode. But I'm just trying to think of there might be examples where because those are very particular in the way that hardcore fans play it. It's very precise. They need to be able to memorize how the animations go, so that
things like that. Yeah, for sure.
So maybe it's possible that in full-on remakes, a different developer that's taken on that job may have made the hit detection slightly different, or the way that stats intermingle maybe slightly throws off the balance of some things. So unfortunately, I can't think of any great examples right now off the top of my head, but I'm just saying that could be a way that, while many people would enjoy a total revamp of a game like that and never be none the wiser, it's possible that there's examples where fans of the original just disregard it because it's messing with a formula that they're really familiar with. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, absolutely, but it also brings in the sort of the other point to the existence of remakes and remasters is it's making these games accessible again to a new generation or people that never got a chance to play it. And it's now on their console, so that there will be a sort of major contingent of players that I mean, there'll be so many players that would never even have heard of Demon's Souls before that.
Exactly.
The fact that it was a PS5 launch game, you would think it's Dark Souls, it's Bloodborne. You would that's where your mind would go when you're thinking of like a From Software game. But I hadn't heard of Demon's Souls before kind of diving deep into this industry. It wasn't, but I'd heard of Dark Souls just at a surface level. So before kind of really sort of diving deep. So I think there is something to be said about that there. One of the sort of another potential one that kind of comes to mind for me is Final Fantasy VII Remake being
Yes.
a big game that significantly modernizes, but gives options, and I really like that about it. And now I played probably about 10 hours of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I've never played the original. So this is where you'll have people that would call that sacrilegious or whatever. But I think the fact that you can play the whole game as a turn-based JRPG, just like the original. But that's
I actually didn't know that. So it lets you do that.
It's got a classic mode, so it just turns it into menu-based.
Right. So is it possible that for most people, this is another one of those examples where, yes, the originals were huge classics and were very much their own thing. Is there any point in going back unless you're heavily nostalgic for them?
Yeah, that's a question that I don't know the answer to. Like, I'd be very interested to hear from some really diehard fans about that game and sort of the relationship it plays with the original. There's maybe something to be said of the fact that Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't the full game. That maybe the fact that the PS1 version is the full story of Final Fantasy VII might be an aspect. It's definitely, there's elements of Final Fantasy VII on the PS1 that, as someone who has no real nostalgia for it, is hard to look at, and then there's elements that are like great to look at. So the fact that there's these like hand-drawn backgrounds, and they're like they're beautiful sort of environments, and then these sort of polygonal guys with jaggy hair and spherical biceps are kind of running through, and but to me, I kind of look at that. I don't mean I look at that and laugh. I've got huge respect for that as a game and the sort of influence that it's had, but I don't look at it fondly, like some people will. So that's maybe an example that is kind of that's why I put it on the list. Really, I don't know the answer to that question.
No, it's definitely a really pertinent example, because obviously it's quite fresh in the mind, and it was perhaps the most significant overhaul of a game. It's because just the scope of it,
it's and the fact that it's not done yet, it's
exactly,
it's huge.
You did also touch on something there as well that comes into it for me, where when you're talking about, well, a lot of the time it does come back to PS1 games, and I think, for example, the Tomb Raider ones are quite good examples. I almost feel like you can go back to these ones and enjoy them for the wrong reasons. Because like they're funny to look at, and trying to play them and just kind of struggling through that, and it's almost creates inadvertently a genre 20 years later of like comedy game to me. So.
No, it's definitely that's right up our street to kind of laugh at what we once found acceptable. No, that's maybe not the best way to put it. In terms of other games that significantly modernize, that was where I was kind of starting to struggle. Like, I sort of made that list. We've spoken about Twin Snakes, we spoke about Final Fantasy VII, Resident Evil 2, but there's nothing that I've played to any great depth that is a significant modernization. I've played plenty of remasters and played games again on the new consoles, but that don't lose the charm of the original games, because they effectively just are the definitive ways to play those original games on the console that you currently own. So for example, I will play. They announced. At the same time on Switch, they announced not all the Borderlands games, but sort of Borderlands Handsome Collection and 1, and the BioShock trilogy on Switch, and they were coming out day and date. I bought Borderlands on Switch, and I think that's a great place to play it because of its art style. It's it's fine, but that kind of co-op nature. So Kerry and I will maybe play that when traveling. We can play through that together, whenever. And we can do that on PlayStation, of course, as well. But, just that kind of portable aspect. But I'm sorry, I will not buy BioShock to play on the go. It's just not the way to play that game. So it's almost the the situation. I think the sort of game specific. For example, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 we've spoken about is going to run at like 700p and 30 FPS on the Switch when that comes out. I'm pretty sure it will. I mean, they've not said. I don't think they've said categorically what it's going to run at, but I will buy that game on Switch because
it makes sense.
A portable Tony Hawk works. A portable Borderlands to an extent, works for me. It's not the place I'm going to start with, but it's. I think it's quite game specific as well. What you end up going back to as well. Like I'll maybe in a few years' time, go back to Borderlands 2 exclusively on the Switch just because of its portable nature, whereas I would never go back to BioShock that way. It's definitely going to be PS4, the backwards compat PS4 game on my PS5 on my nice big TV with the lights off and headset on.
It does make you think who they would be for, because I mean, if that's ending up to be your only way of playing the BioShock games, I mean, who are you? Like, what
is that really going to be many people's first experience with BioShock? I suppose it might. It shouldn't be, but there's the Nintendo fan base that will never have owned other consoles, so maybe it is their only way to play in. Suppose
true,
it's good that there's an option.
Yeah, maybe they just, obviously they're not bothered by the fact that it will be like a technical step backwards.
And also, no, Switch fans are definitely not bothered by things being a technical step backwards, because that has been the entire life cycle of that console, and I still enjoy it. So,
well, fair enough then.
Well, does that, I think that maybe takes us on to some remakes that miss the
negativity section.
Let's get negative in here. Let's start off at the top. We've been talking about Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 quite a bit so far today, and top of my list is, I believe, maybe top of your list here. What game would that be? I'm setting this up for you to knock it out of the park.
As a, I'm trying to think of the word for it. Aloof is maybe not the right word, but as a something 18-year-old. I put far too many hours into this version of this game. For some reason, because it was like the only Tony Hawk's at the time. And Pro Skater HD, which was done by, oh my god, what are they called again?
Robomodo,
which was the unfortunate developer for a while of the Tony Hawk games.
Death of Tony Hawk.
Yeah, after the death of Neversoft, so... They tried their hand at doing like effectively what Pro Skater 1 and 2 is, but back in 2012. It's essentially the same thing. Because,
missing levels and missing content, but
after years. Yeah. Well, I mean, the peripheral-based Tony Hawk games sold like 50,000 copies in total, which is
it's just
unbelievable for Tony Hawk. Unbelievable. So they tried to go a safe route and come out with this, and it's terrible.
I had never played it, so I had never played it, and you had your PS3. This was, maybe a year ago or so, whenever it was. But you had
a little shot.
You had your PS3 here, and so I played it in 2020 or whatever, having never played it before, and. I was just appalled. I was absolutely appalled at that game. Like, it was just...
But what's really quite weird about it is that at the time when that came out, the reviews weren't that bad.
No, I remember that.
I think, a fair few people did try it out and kind of accepted it for what it is because they were just eager to play more Tony Hawk in some way or another. It was kind of just like, okay, whatever, it is what it is. And I think they were just being kind, really, at the time for that lack of context. But when you play, oh my goodness, when you played it in the years after, the physics are wonky. It's just technically a mess. It's glitching all the time. The animations are absolute trash.
It looks really bad as well. I mean, not even the fact that it's 2012. Like it just looks bad. And these are the same guys in the same engine that they built Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 off of, which tells you all you need to know. Quite an interesting story about Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 from our perspective is that it was always we always wanted it, but not obviously to enjoy it, but just to effectively just to laugh at it. But we said we will get it when it is a fiver. When it's £5, we will just get that game and play it for an hour, laugh at it, and then never touch it again. And it's now just unpurchasable. It's
gone.
You can't get it anywhere. It never dropped that low, which was surprising. And
it's just been deleted from history.
Maybe we're better off never having touched it. But there's still a part of me that just wants to. Do you remember when that game came out? And we were just watching like reviews and opinion pieces and stuff, and just appalled at how that existed, and the fact that they called it Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5. It's
talk about sacrilege.
Oh man, absolutely. It was just you compare that to I think the games that remake and remaster that capture that charm of the original is so important, and that was one that just absolutely didn't.
Yeah, like Pro Skater HD didn't do that at all. It didn't even try. It was just such a bizarre.
And then you could kind of attach Pro Skater 5 to that.
Yeah, they sort of go together.
But in the same way, not that it's a remake or remaster, it's slightly off topic, but they were touting that as the return to form. So it has to capture the charm of the original in the same way as a remake or a remake would do. So it's they I don't know who put them in charge of our precious Birdman.
Hey, look, let's just be thankful that we've
come on the other side.
The hard times.
The hardships is like talking about like some world-ending event or something like that. Oh, yeah. We're through it. We're at the other side. The light was at the end of the tunnel, and we've made it.
Well, actually, okay. So, while we're still on the topic of the sort of Tony Hawk stuff, I actually had another example. This is kind of a weird little example, and it's probably the least relevant out of this whole discussion, but I kind of want to just bring it up because we're talking about it anyway. Way back at the start of the Xbox 360, so literally, like a launch title, I think it was my first exposure to a kind of like a lazy port, and it was it was American Wasteland, the 360 version.
Okay,
and it was quite controversial at the time because everyone was like, "Huh, well, this is literally just the PS2 game, but outputting in 720."
Right. Okay.
The work that went into aligning it with the HD era and kind of polishing it up was extremely minimal. Now there was nothing inherently wrong with that because, well, at the time it was like, well, that was the current Tony Hawk game, and there was no notion of what a different revamped version of that could be until obviously next year when they did that with Project A, and it was totally different to the PS2 version. But I think a lot of people just at that time were disappointed that they didn't do that off the bat, or at the very least didn't polish it up more than they could have. But obviously fundamentally, in terms of playability, it was all there. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting early example of talking about sort of like ports. I guess you could almost say that was meant to be like an HD remaster of a PS2 game, but it didn't quite work.
It's interesting that that. Well, first of all, I hadn't heard about that. I didn't know that really existed. I've done a lot of sort of those big video essays about the difference between the same game, different versions on different consoles, but I hadn't actually come across that before. But it's interesting that was cause for some concern. Because you're seeing that just now, and it
was a big price difference as well at the time. Do you know what I mean?
But you're seeing that just now in the PS4 to PS5. I mean,
it's very similar.
It's very similar.
Similar. We've come back around.
We have come back around, and I'm not saying necessarily that it's a bad thing. I didn't play Miles Morales on PS4. Before I got it on PS5. PS5 was my first introduction to that game, but at the end of the day, it wasn't like this. Oh my goodness, this is next gen. The most next gen thing about the PS5 when I first put it up was the Astrobot, Astro's Playroom game, which was great. But that's just interesting that I know it was a slight aside, but that you brought that up because that kind of was just that came to mind for me was that we're kind of in that cross gen moment just now. I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes from here and.
Well,
PS5
there is quite a discussion around, what what is the value proposition here? Because, you know, some developers are charging, you know, £10 to just get that kind of formatted PS5 kind of way, like
Tony
we
Hawk Pro
just
Skater
brought
1
up
and 2.
Pro Skater 1 and 2. And for example, I'm not willing to pay that because to me, well, Pro Skater 1 and 2 runs just like a Tony Hawk game on, you know, my PS5, and I'm kind of okay with just that baseline, that being what it is. But then you'll see some developers that are letting you upgrade for free, and it seems like a good deal because maybe actually there will be some noticeable differences in features, like in the DualSense functionality and whatnot. And I think it's, but that kind of the idea of, is this worth it, has been around for a while. You know?
Yep. I mean, you wouldn't have had that. You look at the difference. I mean, we're obviously talking a lot about Tony Hawk, but you look at the difference between. I mean, there's a version of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4 on PS1 and PS2. Those are inherently different games. So when you compare that to the jump that they made to, and I suppose the biggest one is the difference between Project 8 on PS2 and PS3. You know, stupid. When did that come out? Stupid me at whatever age I was, 2006?
2006, I think.
2006, so I was 10. I've had the PS2 version. I didn't know it was bad until like a year ago when I actually went back and looked, and I went,
you were just a kid.
I was just a kid. I thought that was like really good, and I played the next gen version at a friend's house, and I was blown away by it. But I didn't. I was like,
But these were obviously worthy jumps, and they're clear to see.
Yeah.
But that also ties into, you know, so when the big PS5 exclusive games are coming out, there's a few examples now where we know that there's going to be a PS4 version.
Yes.
And it's kind of controversial. So I'm going to use Horizon 2 as that example. We know there's going to be a PS4 version. And a lot of people are up in arms because they kind of wanted that to just be singularly focused on extracting the power from PS5 and nothing else. Like, just don't waste your time trying to do the
at all. Yeah.
No compromise, no cyberpunk compromise on your last gen consoles. Which, oh my god, actually, that's quite a good part of this discussion as well. I just thought of that. There you go. Great example. If you know, you know. Cyberpunk 2077. What a mess. But I'm guessing that Horizon 2 will be £70 on PS5.
Yep.
And am I right in saying it? The PS4 version will not? It'll be like 55?
As far as I know.
In which case, if they are like really quite close in terms of the experience you're getting, that's kind of a rip-off to me.
It depends on the difference. We
don't know yet, obviously.
We're slightly off topic on remakes that missed the mark, but I think it was a valid point though, is that kind of cross-generational gap, because there's
actually that was quite a tangent, wasn't it?
No, but there are generations that, I mean, that's a cross-gen game. We're talking about cross-gen games at the moment, but there are cross-gen games that literally feel like remakes when you go from the PS1 generation to PS2, and as these generations keep going, it's just going to feel less and less like that. So these games are hardly starting to feel like that. And it kind of takes us back to the very top where we were talking about those free or slightly paid PS5 upgrades are effectively remasters. At the end of the day, they are, I played God of War at 1080p, 30 FPS. I can now play it on my PS5 at 4K checkerboard at 60 FPS. That is the equivalent of the Jak and Daxter trilogy on PS3. That's the equivalent, I would say, in my mind.
We're more into having the best experience and being willing to kind of pay for it, but maybe not everyone is. But anyway. Let's get back to some more examples of shiters.
That's one way to put it. I've actually got there's so many that you could bring up. I've spoken a little bit about for example, the Nintendo Switch being a little bit of a port machine. There are the games that you're not going to rush to play on that. We spoke about that. That's fine. That was kind of in my notes here. But one of them that was really, really interesting to me that kind of came to mind was Assassin's Creed 3 on the Switch. The fact that one even had to get a remaster at all, because I'm sorry, it's not It's not.
Yeah.
It's not the one I would go for. But anyway,
World's most pointless remaster.
World's most pointless remaster. That was the first AC game to come out on Switch. Why was the Ezio trilogy not on Switch? I've actually got a slight aside here as I was writing my notes for.
I have Ezio trilogy.
Okay, right. Okay,
well,
cool.
way,
That's really funny. We'll talk about that in a wee second. Then I love it. That's great.
Great minds.
Great minds. So that was the first AC game to come to Switch. Many questions. Why? Why is 3 your go-to? And also, why does it run worse than the PS3 version? Like, it just weird. It's so strange. It just runs so badly.
Probably it's just lazy.
It's lazy
porting.
I was a sucker and I did buy it. I'm gonna put that out there. I did buy it. But
well, you know.
There was
you live and learn.
There was a part of me that was like, oh, I don't really care what the gameplay, like what the game is. I just want to parkour and do that. And then I played it for like 2 hours and went, nope. I don't think I didn't even get past the first act, as it were. The sort of, I won't spoil it for if you've not played it and you want to. It doesn't really matter. But anyway, so that was one that came to mind for me. But Ezio Trilogy. My only note here is just the weird NPC models in the back. Like, of that like one scene. I don't even think it happened much more than that. And at the end of the day, I don't think that's necessarily a bad remake or remaster of those games. It's cool that they're in a collection on the,
Okay, but I think actually that is a weird one. And there's quite a few like that where when you actually look at side-by-side comparisons, a lot of the time it does come off looking worse. Like they've changed assets to just look weirder.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, what's happened here? And it just strikes of lazy porting. And I mean, fundamentally, that is one of the problems in the games industry because, let's be honest, it's an industry rife with cash grabbing.
Oh, at the end of the day, it is absolutely cash grabbing, and so many,
Ubisoft are going to do it. You know what I mean? So.
I'm tempted almost to put that NPC as the artwork for our social media poster.
Oh my goodness! I think that probably.
Yes. If I can do that well enough, that's going to be the picture used. If not, I'll find something else. But
God,
was there anything else? I mean, that really.
Yeah, well,
I've got so many examples here, like. That do miss the mark. I think there's that we spoke about the Jak and Daxter trilogy. I love the Jak and Daxter games. But in the PS3 HD remaster, remaster, the HD collection, was I played on PS3. I really enjoyed it. It felt just the sort of fresh coat of paint. But on PS4, you can buy the trilogy, but they're the PS2 versions. It's the PS2 backwards compatible versions. That's the thing that misses the mark. It's not a remaster. It's purely just the PS2 port available on PS4.
Kind of a weird thing, yeah.
But that was quite disappointing to me as someone who this is probably coming up on 10 years ago, played the PS3 version and wants to play again, and it's not going back to. I mean, the games are still very playable and they look fine. It's not quite the same as maybe going back to a PS1 game, but it's slightly disappointing when I found that out. I saw them on the store. Oh, Jak and Daxter's now out on the PS4 store, and I was like, yeah. Oh,
well, I tend to find that a lot of disappointment in this area comes down to ports more often than not, like that one and. Actually, if you go and look at like the 360 PS3 versions of like San Andreas, they're actually quite infamous for being terrible because they stripped out a bunch of stuff. There's so much weird stuff in it, and just they don't work properly, stuff like that. So there actually is quite a lot of examples of that type of thing, which is where it gets interesting. Another just kind of quite infamous example I wanted to talk about briefly was. And this ties into how actually this series has been neglected, actually. And I've always wanted to get into it, but I'm waiting for them to do good by the series. Okay. And that is the Silent Hill collection on PS3. A lot of people felt the charm of those games was stripped out of them. They basically did some weird stuff when they ported those games onto PS3 and for many people ruined them. I think by accounts, they were still playable, but just didn't have the same, they took out all the dense fog and stuff like that.
I mean, that is Silent Hill, though. Like,
exactly,
the fog
exactly,
is.
yeah.
I mean, that is the first thing I think. Having never played the games, the first thing I think about is dense fog and atmosphere. That seems like the first thing you would get right in any port or remaster or remake or anything.
Yeah,
you would hope anyway.
It's just always disappointing when there's laziness and bizarre things in kind of remasters. It's not always sunshine and roses.
No.
And this is my last one, but to briefly touch on a potential future one that I hope turns out good in the end. I just think it's interesting to ponder about it. Is the upcoming Prince of Persia: Sands of Time remake, because they delayed it to high heavens because of the backlash
now, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really a shame, because that was one that I really want to turn out well.
I see it as a good thing. I mean, what's the quote that no delayed game is, bad or whatever, something like that. A rushed game is bad. Delayed games rarely are. I take your time with that. I want to see that one do really well. I love that game.
Yeah.
I want to see that one done really, really well. I was super disappointed when I saw the footage from, it would have been a Ubisoft conference, or remote conference thing that they've been doing over the pandemic. But yeah, no, that's definitely one that springs to mind. I've got one more as well, right. And it was Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee on the Switch. I didn't play these ones, and I was all ready to play them, and then Pokemon of late's been a bit weird, because for me, and I'm gonna all my opinions here, the further they've gotten away from this kind of pixel top down, just in the original kind of idea of Pokemon, the less I've been enjoying it. I've missed out many of late. I played Sword and Shield on Switch and was very disappointed in those, but I think maybe a year before, I could be wrong, maybe not even as much as that, they came out with Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which were based on the original games, on Red and Blue and Yellow. Maybe even more so Yellow, because you were running about with Pikachu or Eevee or whatever. But they based most of the game mechanics off of the Pokemon Go game. It was obviously based on the hype and sort of phenomenon around that, but I felt like that was such a sort of course Pokemon Go is still really popular, but it was such a kind of flash in the pan, sort of relatively, it took over the culture, it took over the world for like a summer, and then it was left with its hardcore fans. And so they made this game, and I heard they're making a Switch version of the original, effectively Red, Blue and Yellow. All in on that there. That was the one I played so much as a kid. And then to find out that it was using effectively the mechanics from Pokemon Go. There was still battling here and there. You would battle trainers, but you wouldn't go out and catch wild Pokemon in the same way. And it was a slightly hampered experience. For the features they were adding, I feel like for every feature they added, I felt like they were kind of stripping two out of the game. It was kind of one step forward, two steps back in that sense. So that was one that sort of, just last night, as I finished my notes and I was lying in bed and thinking about recording today, I was like, that one, and then I put it on the list. So I just felt like if I'm always down to dog on recent Pokemon, apparently. So
well, I obviously I'm really not versed in the Pokemon games. I played them a bit on the old Game Boy back in the day, but other than that, I really don't have much context for them. But it does seem kind of surprising and a big shame that one would have turned out the way you described.
Well, and also they're coming out with Diamond and Pearl remakes that they just announced. But at the same time, like, so I think it was maybe a tweet or like I heard it in another podcast, but they said, does Game Freak have a contract with Nintendo to just make the worst looking, like the best selling, worst looking games? I mean, they just like, I'm not saying the Switch is a powerhouse, but come on, when you can do, like a Mario Odyssey or even a like Zelda Breath of the Wild treatment where there's a an art style for sure, but it looks lovely. It's a nice looking game. And the money in Pokemon, like the crazy money in those games, I just feel that there's a, that's a brilliant Pearl and Shining Diamond or whatever they're calling it. I'm interested to see them. I never played Pearl and Diamond as a kid. I didn't have those ones, so there's a part of me that's quite interested. It's not got this sort of modern style of kind of third person camera. It's still, as far as I remember on the trailer, it's still fairly top down, or maybe not, maybe isometric more. I don't quite know the best way to describe it in comparison to the likes of Sword and Shield, but it kind of piqued my interest a bit more because it felt like slightly a return to form, and maybe the sort of version of the game that maybe becomes the definitive version. It's hard to say. Those games are so simple in their sort of construction that they can be pixel art. It's the same way you wouldn't want to play. I was about to say you wouldn't want to play a Mario side scroller that doesn't use pixel art, but they make those like still to this day. So that was a terrible point I was about to make there, because I do play those. I caught it and I still made it, but turned it into a joke. Anyway,
that's how you do it.
So that actually slightly leads us on. I'm the king of segues to remakes that we want, because that is an upcoming one. We're talking about Prince of Persia and we're talking about that Pokemon one. So let's chat a little bit. Let's finish off the episode. We'll come to the end of the episode here. Just kind of, there's not too much to say about these because we don't know anything. Well, we don't know if they're going to exist, or if if they're even.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's still so much that we could actually talk about in terms of remakes, remasters, ports, all the things that have gone into it and how they're perceived. But, obviously we can't cover everything.
Yeah.
And when it comes to these ones that we want to see, for me, it's kind of like half of them feel realistic and half are kind of, that's never going to happen. So.
Cool. Well, if you want to start us off, what you were thinking with that?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to run down this little list that I've got.
Yeah.
Not say too much. Metal Gear Solid 1, I think, is a big kind of obvious one for many. Whether that'll ever happen or not, I don't know. It does seem a bit far-fetched with the whole deal with Kojima and Konami, and how would they even go about it, especially some of the things that were in that game and how they did it with the PS1 at the time. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, just the innovative things. So that would be great, but also probably unrealistic.
I've got that on my list here, so if there's any crossover, we can talk about it briefly. I've got that on my list here for the reason that we spoke about last week, where I would struggle to go back and play them, so I want the remake to experience it. That's, I said that last episode. I said that last episode, so that's my thought when I wrote that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, another unrealistic one for me, Morrowind or Oblivion. Never going to happen because they're taking... Oh, come on. I mean, Bethesda is a whole other kettle of fish, so we'll not even get into it.
Nope, that's an episode in its own right.
And I mean, talking about charm of the originals, wow. Again, Morrowind, Oblivion, it's a whole other discussion right there. Yep. Charm is one word for it.
Yep.
But, I'm partial to them, and it would be nice, but who knows? Maybe Elder Scrolls 6 will be great and we can be happy, but who knows? Thug, 28 Underground 1, probably not going to happen again. It would just be, that's more like a selfish one for me. I don't think that probably is one that many people are screaming for. But
I've got more Tony Hawk on my list, and that probably is just going to mean maybe like a Pro Skater 3 and 4, or just 3, or
that's more realistic.
More realistic, but I actually purposely didn't put down the Underground games because I feel that they control great still to this day. They still feel great, but also I think that you would struggle to find the charm of the kind of janky kind of PS2 story.
Yeah.
I mean, we did go back recently and just play through one again.
It's a great laugh.
It was, but maybe for a slightly different reason. But the gameplay still feels great. So that was one that I actually started typing and went, actually, you know what? We're talking about charm of the original games. I think the charm there saves that a wee bit more.
It's kind of a throwaway one, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting nonetheless.
We've already talked about Resident Evil 4. We've already talked about Silent Hill. Hopefully that's something that eventually comes out in the wash.
Coming out in the wash.
And then the last one I've actually got, the last one that comes is on my list here. And it's kind of only here because this genre of game has fallen by the wayside and gotten a bit confused recently. And I think this would be quite a nice thing for a lot of fans of this type of game. And this is No Mercy. WWF No Mercy.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I was trying to think, like, well, I loved wrestling games, and everyone loves the classics. And I'm like, well, which one is the one that, if it's ever going to happen, would make sense? Or even just something based off of No Mercy to bring back that feel and joy of that one. Because I thought about, one of the good old SmackDown games or something, but who knows? It's a thought.
No Mercy has got. I've got some sort of very nostalgic memories for that. My brother had that on the N64, and that's the always the example that comes to mind when I was like his friend was over, and it was like, Mum said I have to play with you guys, and he doesn't want me to, that kind of thing. And getting the Player 3 third party N64 controller that's not shaped like an N64 controller. So whenever whenever anyone brings up like Mad Cat controllers or something like that, that's always like my go-to memory is my brother just like unwrapping like the bottom of the box kind of like third party. It almost looked like an SNES controller, but it was an N64 controller. It was really strange, but No Mercy I do, as much as I don't have actually I was about to say I don't have much experience with wrestling games. That me and my friends used to play the SmackDown versus Raw games, or just the SmackDown games before that, and so I do have some but yeah, No Mercy I would say just that kind of Attitude Era, kind of even calling it WWF, like really making it painfully obvious that this is a 90s inspired thing. I think that would work quite well.
I don't know how they would be able to go about it. I mean, obviously they wouldn't even be able to call it WWF. That wouldn't work. But
they, that they would just like shoehorn in like all the the people that you don't want, you don't care about, or new wrestlers or something, or
it's just wrestling these days is such a sad state of affairs. It's like I kind of just want something that brings the joy back, but who knows anyway.
Well, I'll sort of go down the list in the same way. One I'm surprised that you didn't mention was the Skate 1, 2 and 3. Make us a Skate trilogy, please.
Well, you know why? Because Skate 4's coming.
True.
And those games are ones that we have already said definitively go back to quite a lot and have no problem with. So to me, it's like, myself. No, it didn't. I mean, I know you're obviously more into the idea of getting a remaster package than I.
I don't know.
It would be nice. I would probably still play it.
I just want to be able to unplug my my PS3 because that's the only reason it's in my entertainment center. Okay, along the same kind of lines, you could argue the same thing for Portal 1 and 2. We spoke about them. They're still very replayable, but there's just a part of me that really wants a really, really good looking version of it. Just purely visuals, the controls in Portal, the puzzles, everything is so well balanced, and voice acting's great.
If they did a total refresh of Portal 1, just I guess it would be a remake and maybe even like added like doubled the size of it or something.
Something
added
like
more
that.
in.
Who knows? But anyway, that's a sort of more of a pipe dream. I sort of wrote I was kind of looking at my old games in my cupboard, sort of the GameCube and PS2 games. I had Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, which are you either love them or you hate them. But as I was sort of thinking about it, the same reason kind of came back to me for Tony Hawk Underground, where those are. They control well to an extent. They're nippy and responsive. They kind of have to be because it's Sonic, but they're so campy, and the cutscenes are so bad, and the voice acting is so bad.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like if they modernized that, it would lose all of that charm, because the most recent 3D Sonic games have been really, really bad, and then you could argue trash. They've been less janky in the cutscene department, but that's where the charm would be lost. So that's charm and nostalgia is such an interesting thing. Simpsons Hit and Run. Simpsons Hit and Run needs a remake more than anything, but just remake that game. Good one. Because I think we also forget how relatively little content there was in that game compared to games nowadays. So I wonder if that would be controversial, and then if they tried to modernize it, would it then take the charm away? That's the ultimate balance. And then I had Crazy Taxi in there again, a lot of time spent on that. Red Dead 1, they were only just based on the rumors that were kind of kicking about that, they're about to, these were like rumors last year, they're about to release Red Dead 1 and the Red Dead 2 engine, and I was like, they're not going to do that, but that would be quite
they're
nice.
They're not going to because they give you the map in 2 anyway,
but
more or less.
I think that's why they thought it was going to happen, because the map was there almost kind of ready to go. It's not going to happen. Like, it's just not. But it was part of it.
I mean, I would absolutely. We actually talked about this semi recently. Being able to go down to Mexico in that new engine. Oh my goodness!
Yeah. So it's along that kind of line, from the conversation that we had a while ago. And then the last one here is, it's not even a remake. It's not even a remaster. Just make us, and I think it's likely is going to happen, but like a Legend of Zelda All Stars collection, like 3D All Stars collection. On the Switch, because they came out with the Mario one for his 35th anniversary that just actually stopped being on sale on the 31st of March, the day Mario died, as the internet called it.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
It's so stupid. But anyway, why did they take it off the store? But I bought it day one, so it doesn't really matter. But I want the same treatment for Legend of Zelda. I want what do I want? I want Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker. I mean, those would be the main 3 that I want. Of course, there's people probably saying Twilight Princess or, all these things. But those are the 3 that I would want for sure. They don't need a remake. They don't need a remaster. Ideally, I would like the Wii U version of Wind Waker put in there, but I don't think that's very wishful thinking. But just give us it all, because I don't know if you heard much about the last Nintendo Direct. For everyone wondering, that's like, early April 2021 just now, if you're listening. So it'd been, what was it? It was like 500 days since the Nintendo Direct, and it is now. There'd been many directs and stuff, but or indie presentations, but this was like direct. This and that, and it was something like, I think it was like 50 minutes long. It's also now the year of Zelda's 35th anniversary, so you're thinking, they're going to do some stuff with that. And they got to the end of the direct. The direct was trash the whole way through. It was, there's probably people out there that it was very, very Japanesey, and I don't mean that makes it trash, of course not. But it was very much not catered to a massive portion of their market, being the Western market. It was very much catered to the in depth and. Anyway, doesn't matter. But it got to the end, and it was, and Legend of Zelda creator came on screen. He was wearing a Zelda t-shirt. Why do they all wear the t-shirts under their blazer? It makes you want to think something's happening. And then he was like, hey, I bet you want to, translations coming through, I bet you want to hear about Breath of the Wild 2. And we were like, yeah, we do, because they announced it like at the last direct, like 500 days before. And he was like, we don't have anything to share, so... Cool. Like, they actually came out saying we don't have anything to share, and we were like, sick, lovely, thanks, great. And then they were like,
wow, Nintendo,
but here's something to tide you over, and we were like, oh, here we go, here's the collection. And then it was a Switch port of Skyward Sword, which is a Wii game, very much based on Wii and nunchuck motion controls, and it's much more limited in its capacity, and it, in all honesty, really doesn't look that good. In my opinion. I mean, you compare it to the GameCube's Wind Waker, I was just talking about it, but that game still, I mean, we spoke about that in the Timeless Classics episode, that game still looks incredible to this day on the original hardware, let alone the HD remaster of it.
Go, that's
brings
how
it full circle.
That's how you did it right,
Yep, and there's an example that you've done it right, and this is the one you're bringing back, but that will.
Wow, yeah. What I mean, it's hilarious to hear about sort of the way Nintendo go about things these days. I mean, such a smorgasbord of odd stuff, and obviously, I sadly don't have too much to say about Zelda games, and I'm sure again we have a future episode topic planned where I will go into that, and we'll go into similar things. But hey, whoever said we were Sony ponies? Come on!
I've just told you how, because Nintendo fans hate Nintendo. Do you know what I mean? It's the same. Star Wars fans hate Star Wars, and Nintendo fans hate Nintendo. So, well, I think that's me. I don't really have anything. I've got it on my notes here. The Last of Us Part 1 looking as good as The Last of Us Part 2. Just it's never going to happen. It doesn't need to happen. I don't even necessarily want it, but that second part looked so damn good, and there's just
in an ideal world, we would have parity there with the engine. That would be nice, but it's kind of
absolutely not necessary. So
more work than probably is necessary.
It was just so we could mention Last of Us in every episode. So yes.
Actually, yes, just to say we are Sony ponies. Ha ha! Get up, you.
We filled you. We filled you all along. Right. Cool. Well, that's a lovely, succinct 90 minutes. So we hope you enjoyed our conversation. This conversation is by no means done. There's always remakes and remasters to talk about. If we feel it pertinent in future episodes, we'll maybe revisit this topic here and there. But it's it was a fun conversation. I've enjoyed researching it and kind of looking back on kind of the charm, and it kind of took us from the timeless classics and the charm of those games to what we were speaking about today. So I feel like it was linked quite nicely. So yes,
I enjoyed that very much, and hopefully we can get into some different things in future episodes and keep this ball rolling.
Keep the ball rolling. Well, thank you so much for listening. You can check us out on the socials. One slight plug that we will make: if you listen on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast service, if you can head to Apple and you enjoy the show, give us a little 5-star rating. Give us some love out there, because that does help.
Please, sir.
Please, sir, give us 5 stars. It puts us up on the charts. So get new listeners and hopefully get more content and things like that. But so next episode in 2 weeks' time. Episodes out every Wednesday at midday. So you can set reminders and listen away, and just get in touch. Get in touch if you hate all of our opinions today. That's
Please do.
Please don't.
No.
Actually,
that helps us.
It does help us. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Well, if you've not got anything to add,
I do not have anything to add. I am happy with what we have said. Goodbye.
Good. so bold and brash. More like belongs in the trash. Right. Okay.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.